This is what we know. All the things that make me mad about those other guys and all the things they do wrong, the one thing that I will not forgive them for is they try to steal the joy from this country. They try and steal the joy. But you know what? You know what? Our next president brings the joy. She emanates the joy.
Stand up.
Yes, indeed she does, and I love the use of that word and the focus on that feeling. I am in it. I hope you are too. Everything seems just a little bit better as a result of the massive transformation change that we have seen occur before our eyes. Vice President and her running mate on the road yesterday in both Wisconsin and Michigan. We'll get into it, but joining me on today's show, and thank you so much for pressing play, is the great David Daley, who is a real smart guy and has been involved in writing about politics for a long time. He is the author of the national bestseller Rat Fucked, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, which helped spark the drive to reform gerrymandering. Of course, he's got a new book. It's real important. We talked about it. It's called Antidemocratic, Inside the Far Right's 50-Year Plot to Control American Elections. David Daley is my guest, and our conversation, which is real good, begins at 20 minutes. But right now, I've got your headlines and the sound that I found from yesterday, and I just have to, as always, say thank you very much for subscribing to the show. Tell your friends about it. Patreon.com/PDominic. I cannot do it if you aren't going to pay $5 or more. Many of you do. So thank you so much, because I love doing it, and I'm here for you each and every day, and I thank you for pressing play. All right. Well, first of all, apologies for yesterday's email to subscribers. The Patreon email got all messed up, and I didn't include Kimberly Kelly's amazing pictures from Alaska. I will in today's show. Also, I will be hosting a hangout tonight. That's right, 8 p.m. I hope to see you at our hangout tonight. We had a great one on Monday. Definitely go watch that. I should probably edit and share the audio from it. Much of it was real good. J.L. Covan stopped by. He was hilarious. We had a lot of great comments from our friends in Minnesota, Kathy and Mark, who were both joining us. And thanks for your feedback on yesterday's show. Even though there was some kind of issue with the audio, it was mono and not stereo. A few of you made me aware of that. Also, I said I called the band Husker Du instead of Husker Du, which was quite embarrassing for me, apparently. A lot of people felt real cringe over that mistake. Those are the corrections from yesterday. Let's get to the news from today. I hope to see you tonight. Let's start with the weather. Tropical storm Debbie taking a breather over western Atlantic Ocean, but it is not done with us. It's going to douse the coastal Carolinas before it slowly marches right up into my doorstep. We've had a lot of rain the last couple of days, and it made landfall along Florida's Gulf Coast as a Category 1 on Monday. It's now hanging out off the southern Carolina coast, smoking a cigarette about 55 miles southwest of Charleston. And so we'll see what happens as it comes on back inland. And be careful out there. And speaking of weather, extreme heat, this is more of a climate story, is threatening the Great Barrier Reef. This generation will probably see the demise of the Great Barrier Reef unless humanity acts with far more urgency to rein in climate change. According to new research study I'm referencing here, the news is that found that the ocean temperatures around the Great Barrier Reef, the largest coral reef system in the world, are at their highest in at least 400 years. Of course, the extreme heat causes the coral to bleach, meaning it loses the symbiotic algae that it needs to survive. And so that new study is real important, published on Wednesday in the journal Nature, if you want to look more into it. All right, let's head overseas. In Ukraine, troops have apparently crossed into Russia's western Kursk region and appear to be advancing in a major incursion onto Russian soil. The Middle East, several Arab countries are encouraging Iran to exercise restraint, responding to the assassination of Hamas's political leader in Tehran last week. In Thailand, the Constitutional Court disbanded the country's most popular political party over charges that some of its proposals were an attempt to overthrow the monarchy. And while Britain, the UK, was braced for protests last night, thousands of police officers fanning out across the country, or the kingdom, amid fears that protests planned by far-right groups would descend into fresh violence after days of anti-immigrant riots. Well, they didn't show up. At least as of last night, large far-right protests had not materialized, and only a handful of arrests had been made. Instead, this is interesting, thousands of anti-racism protesters gathered in cities across the country, including Bristol, Birmingham, Liverpool, and London, carrying signs that said things like "refugees welcome" and "racists out, refugees in," which I think is awesome. I love it. They didn't show up, and guess who did? The good people. Look for the good people. And a scary story out of Austria. You probably heard about this, but 2 men were arrested yesterday in connection with alleged planned terrorist attacks at major events in Vienna, Austria, including Taylor Swift's upcoming concerts. Officials said both men had become radicalized through the internet, allegedly had specific and detailed plans on how to carry out an attack. One of the men who was arrested by Austrian federal and state police was a 19-year-old who was alleged to have pledged his allegiance to ISIS. The pair had aspirational plans for attacking Vienna's major event sites and specifically had homed in on this weekend's Taylor Swift concerts, according to U.S. officials briefed on the matter. They both had been under surveillance for some time and were well known to the Austrians, officials said. A bomb squad found chemical substances when the 19-year-old was arrested, authorities said. Investigators are working to determine whether the substances could have been used to build a bomb. So it doesn't look like the threat was imminent, and it looks like they were watching these guys, and maybe an abundance of caution for canceling those Taylor Swift concerts. But man, so many, thousands and thousands of brokenhearted young people and their parents who spent their life savings on those tickets. Finally, in terms of international stories, summer COVID surge hits at least 84 countries and continues to climb. Dozens of athletes at the Paris Olympics have tested positive for the coronavirus. A summer COVID wave and the accompanying fevers, coughs, and general misery continue to wash over the Americas and parts of Asia and Europe, including the Paris Olympics, offering the latest evidence that the coronavirus moves in ways distinct from other respiratory ailments. The World Health Organization said this week that the virus is increasing in at least 84 countries, despite perceptions that the pathogen is a remnant of the past. It ain't. I know 2 people today I found out have COVID, one here in the U.S. and one overseas. So, yeah, it's not gone. In case anybody's wondering, COVID-19 is still very much with us, says the World Health Organization epidemiologist Maria van Kerkhove at a news conference on Tuesday. And here's some news on abortion. Planned Parenthood announced this week that the only Manhattan clinic would stop performing abortions after 20 weeks. I'm not sure why that is. I want to get read in on it. But in a related story, U.S. abortion numbers have slightly risen since Roe v. Wade was overturned. More abortions, even though they made it illegal. The number of women getting abortions in the U.S. actually went up in the first 3 months of 2024 compared with before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, according to a report released yesterday reflecting the lengths that Democratic-controlled states went to expand access. A major reason, apparently, is the increase in that some Democratic-controlled states enacted laws to protect doctors who use telemedicine to see patients in places that have abortion bans. According to the quarterly #WeCount report for the Society of Family Planning, which supports abortion access, this data, of course, comes ahead of the November elections in which abortion rights supporters hope the issue will drive voters to the polls. In some places, voters will have a chance to enshrine or reject state-level abortion protection. So it's a big, big deal. It's probably the most important issue that Americans are going to be motivated to go and vote for this year. Let's see, what else do I have for you? The latest January 6th indictment, they are still going. It's a California woman. She's the big winner. She was charged with taking a cache of weapons, including a fucking sword, a steel whip, and a knife into the U.S. Capitol during January 6, 2021 attack by the mob of Donald Trump supporters. According to court records unsealed yesterday, this woman had a short sword. Her name is Kennedy Lindsay. A steel tactical weapon, a collapsible baton, pepper spray, a butterfly knife, and a flashlight taser in her possession when a U.S. Secret Service officer searched her backpack, according to an FBI affidavit. Can you imagine when her backpack was being searched and this guy just keeps pulling out these random weapons like a sword and a whip? Was he like, where do you think, are you going to a Dungeons and Dragons cosplay event? What kind of a ninja A flashlight taser. Man, yeah, you can't have those weapons. Certainly not when you're in the U.S. Capitol trying to overthrow an election. That's the kind of lady that Donald Trump wants to pardon? Okay. Someone should ask all of his surrogates, including J.D. Vance, about that. How do you feel about the woman who has just been indicted, who had a sword and a whip and a knife and a baton, pepper spray, and a flashlight taser? How do you feel about her? Is she guilty? No? Okay. Yeah, exactly. If that were a couple black people protesting an actual thing, police brutality, you'd be losing your effing minds. Who are these black ninjas? California has apparently suffered more than 50 aftershocks after being rocked by a 5.2 magnitude earthquake overnight. I heard about that, but I haven't heard from any of you. A lot of California people. Everybody all right? Why does it say California suffers in this news headline? All right, NASA is apparently exploring some backup options to get these two astronauts that are on the International Space Station, who everybody's acting like aren't stuck. Oh, they're stuck. For weeks, NASA has downplayed problems experienced by the Boeing spacecraft Starliner that took the two astronauts to the International Space Station in June. But on Wednesday, NASA officials admitted that the problems with the spacecraft were more serious than first thought, and the astronauts may not be able to travel home on that same vehicle after all. So it seems like a bit of a disconcerting quandary right there. I'm sure they'll figure it out. They're NASA. All right, those are your headlines. Now it's time to get to the sound I found. You can always send me your headlines and sound bites to standupwithpete@gmail.com, as well as your compliments and complaints and anything else. A lot of people emailing me, by the way, about the guest Shad White, who was on the show this week, the auditor from Mississippi and Trump supporter. I really appreciate the wide range of feedback that I got on it. Pat F. emailed me and said, Pete, of course I'm not writing just about Shad White. I listen to all your shows, but today I was 4 shows behind. First, Maura Quint, and I laughed and laughed. Then Andrew Spar doing the work of a real patriot, an all-around decent human being. And then there was Shad White. You know, we have a nephew who works for the oil rigs, something I'm sure Shad hasn't done for a while. Our nephew works 90 hours a week. When he saw him in June, he was making around $20,000 a week. He's 36, but looks way older. He barely knew his 2 small children who were staying with his mother for the weekend because his wife had just filed for divorce. That is Texas, and of course, they're all Trumpers, just like Shad, even as their lives fall apart because nothing is more important than making the money. And of course, everything is worse under Biden, blah, blah, blah. Shad may have grown up in Mississippi, but he wore blinders his whole life. Thanks, Pete. You're the best. Thank you, Pat. I really appreciate that email, and I really appreciate all of the feedback on that one and everything else. All right, let's see. Let's get to the sound from the rallies yesterday in both Wisconsin and Michigan. You had Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, both of them. They first went to Wisconsin and then they went to Michigan. But let me just start with some of the clips from the Michigan rally, because you had the president of the UAW, which is centered right there in Michigan, Shawn Fain, who's a real firebrand. And I absolutely love this short soundbite from his comments, his speech opening for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
You know, every time Donald Trump gets a chance, he trashes our union and he trashes the working class. He comes to Michigan. He talks about he's going to bring back the auto industry. Let me tell you something. Donald Trump doesn't know shit about the auto industry.
Oh, my God. That was amazing. Shawn Fain, the president of the UAW, organized labor is all in for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Pretty exciting to see. And they are so organized, and they definitely turn out the vote. So that matters a lot. Now, here's the governor of Michigan, who was being considered for VP herself at one point. It's Gretchen Whitmer with a very funny joke at Tim Walz's expense.
He's a former soldier and a state championship winning football coach. I mean, maybe he should help out the Vikings after we smoked them twice last year. I'm just saying. Okay. You can't take away our Lions' pride, right? All right.
Oh, man. Gretchen Whitmer hitting the governor of Minnesota, the Vikings. I guess they're rivals. I don't know. All right. Well, here is Tim Walz. It's Walz. I keep saying Waltz. It's Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. And yesterday he got another bite at the apple at the campaign. Here he is in Michigan.
By the way, we got about 91 days. And I keep telling people this, 91 days. My God, you can do anything for 91 days. 90. Christ, I haven't slept in 24 hours. You know why? We'll sleep when we're dead. We'll sleep when we're dead.
Man, he's good. I hate that phrase, but he got the days wrong, and the audience is that connected that they got it right and corrected him. And now to Kamala Harris, who, of course, is the candidate at the top of the ticket, running for president. Will she be our next president? Ooh, I hope so. Here she is. This is how Kamala Harris handles a heckler in Michigan, by the way.
He intends to surrender our fight against the climate crisis, and he intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
So it goes on like this for like another 30 seconds, and people start chanting. Yeah, I'm not going to give it all to you, but here is some more content or substance from Kamala Harris yesterday, Michigan.
Think about the fact that last month, the United States Supreme Court basically told the former president, who has been convicted of fraud, that going forward, he will be immune no matter what he does in the White House. Think about what that means and the changed circumstances since 16/6/20 when you think about what that court decision means. Donald Trump has openly vowed if reelected, he will be a dictator on day one. That he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. That he would round up peaceful protesters and throw them out of our country. And even, quote, terminate the United States Constitution. So let us be clear. Let us be clear. Someone who suggests we should terminate the Constitution of the United States should never again have a chance to stand behind the seal of the President of the United States.
Yep, absolutely killing it, hitting their marks. Great lineup in both Wisconsin and Michigan yesterday for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And today they will be at another event in Michigan before returning to Raleigh, North Carolina, and it'll be their 8th visit to North Carolina this year, Kamala Harris. The vice president will travel then to Savannah, Georgia, her 7th visit to Georgia on Friday. Vice President Harris will be at a campaign event in Savannah. Then she'll go to Phoenix, Arizona, and then Las Vegas. And on Saturday, they're working as well at another event in Las Vegas, and then on to California, where the vice president, I don't know if she's doing a rally or a fundraiser or what she'll be doing on Saturday in California. And I'm not sure, this guidance doesn't say if Tim Walz will be with her, but I'm guessing he will. All right. Now, here is a veterans leader who was at one of the rallies talking about his support for both Tim Walz, who, of course, is a 24-year veteran of the National Guard, and Kamala Harris.
Are extremely important here, and they've got to realize if they want to protect that democracy, protect the Constitution, then we know who the candidate is, and that's Kamala Harris.
All right, there you go. Final piece of audio that I've got for you comes from, well, everybody was reporting on this. I think ABC News got the scoop, but I'll let Joy Reid set this up. But you're going to hear audio of the former disgraced president talking to the then Minnesota, he's still the Minnesota governor, but this is during the Minneapolis uprising, riots, protests that took place in the wake of the George Floyd killing there. And so Trump, the president, calls up Tim Walz and says he handles it perfectly, which is pretty weird because he's been saying, and so has J.D. Vance and everybody on the right, that he's a disaster and he let it happen and so on. But, well, Joy Reid sets it up, and then you hear the audio right now.
Here's Donald Trump's campaign today. He posted on his fake Twitter, his pretend version of Twitter, an attack on Governor Walz's handling of the George Floyd protests. We have now started to hear that being a theme of the Trump campaign, the Trump Vance campaign. Well, inconveniently enough, there's always a tape. ABC News has uncovered a call of Donald Trump doing the opposite. Here he is praising Governor Walz's handling of the self-same George Floyd protests in Minneapolis. Here he is on tape.
I know Governor Walz is on the phone, and we spoke, and I fully agree with the way he handled it the last couple of days. But once you called out and you dominated, you took the worst place and you made it. They didn't even cover it last night because there was so little action. because you dominated. You dominated. It showed the incredible difference between your great state yesterday and the day before compared to the first few days, which was just absolutely. Nope, never seen it. Absolutely. A police force and taken over. And I don't blame you. I blame the mayor. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
Will that change anything? Will he continue saying that Tim Walz screwed it all up when in that audio we heard him praising him? Yeah, there goes that talking point. I mean, he'll still use it, but not nearly as effective when you hear that tape, perhaps. All right. Well, it's time to get to my guest. I hope you liked and appreciated the news segment. I put a lot of work into it each and every day. And now it's time to get to the always excellent David Daley. He's the former editor-in-chief of Salon.com. He's appeared on all the major networks. His work, his writing has appeared in the New Yorker, New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, and all the other big ones. He's the author of 2 previous books before this, but this book is so good and so important. It's called Antidemocratic, Inside the Far Right's 50-Year Plot to Control American Elections. Heather Cox Richardson says, chilling and convincing, Antidemocratic is a must-read for anyone seeking to understand American politics in 2024. A riveting yet disturbing history of the 50-year Republican plot to hijack voting rights in America, its profound implications for the 2024 presidential election, and the crucial role that Chief Justice John Roberts played in determining how we vote. It is a real important book. David is a great journalist and author. I hope that you'll get it. I hope that you'll follow him on Twitter, learn more about him in all of the show notes, which I hope you check out each and every day. Of course, David's been on the show many times before. Very happy to have him back. Let's do it. Oh, the brilliant David Daley is back with a brand new, super important book that I know you've been working on for a while. Congratulations. Antidemocratic, Inside the Far Right's 50-Year Plot to Control American Elections. Hi, David Daley.
Hey, Pete. Thanks for having me back.
Wow. This book is real good, real important, and I hopefully it gets a lot of great reviews and sells a lot of copies and you make money. But let me just get the broad overview of why you thought this book needed to be written, because there's a lot being written about the subject, but I have my own opinion as to why I think this is different from most of what is out there.
I think it's because an anti-democracy faction has really hijacked the U.S. judiciary. It's captured the U.S. Supreme Court. It's corrupted the Supreme Court. The justices have made it harder for people of color to vote. They've handed Donald Trump immunity from prosecution for the crimes committed while in office. They've taken away women's reproductive freedoms. And they owe their seats really to a 5-decade-long dark money project led by Leonard Leo, by the Federalist Society, by the conservative legal movement that has really turned the U.S. Supreme Court from one co-equal of 3 branches into really a super branch with a conservative supermajority, handpicked by Leo, chosen by presidents who lost the popular vote. And they sit in private and deliberate with no ethics code, with no accountability. They're in office for life. And Abraham Lincoln said that if we hand our freedoms over policy over to the U.S. Supreme Court, that the people will have ceased to become their own rulers. And I think that we are in that moment right now. And I wanted to show in this book how we got here.
Talk a little bit more about how the 3 branches of government have been created unequal by our Supreme Court and the commanders of Gilead that now run it.
Yes. If you look at an issue like abortion rights, for example, what you saw was a U.S. Supreme Court that decided that it would overturn Roe v. Wade. It would put an end to 50 years of freedom that people have counted on in this country. And Sam Alito, in his opinion, says, gosh, we have not actually overruled anything or taken anything away. What we've done is we've simply returned an issue of great public significance to the people and their elected representatives. And that is so much hogwash, because what this court has also done is greenlight some of the most extreme and toxic partisan gerrymanders in the country, in state legislatures and Congress. And so what the court did, with full knowledge, was it returned this issue to state legislatures that have been so poisoned, that have been rendered so immune from the people at the ballot box, that they feel perfectly fine going ahead and passing laws that upwards of 60, 70% of people in these states disagree with. They can do so with impunity because they can't be touched. And so even in Oklahoma, even in Texas, even in Florida and Alabama and Georgia and Ohio, where these laws have been passed, vast majorities disagree with them, but they're essentially powerless to do anything about it. And so it's this 1-2 combination of a hijacked conservative, deeply ideological judiciary, along with these toxic, entrenched gerrymanders that has taken our policy, pushed it far to the right, and made it almost impossible for voters to do anything about it.
You've laid it out for us in the book, and I really think everybody needs to buy this book because it's got it all in there. Our friend Professor Eric Siegel highly recommends all of David Daley's work, but people really need to understand what you call the long game, the history, where it started. We've touched on it in lots of different ways, you and I and me and other historians and con law scholars have talked about this, but you put it all in this first part of your book. Where do you want to start? Go all the way back, David Daley, and tell us where the long game started. And I think probably most importantly is you spell out why it started, because they were losing.
They were losing. I think that's right. And conservatives and the right weren't used to losing at the Supreme Court. There's really one little window of time when the Supreme Court has actually been on the side of the American people, and that's the Warren Court of the 1950s and 60s, which actually breathed life into the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed after the Civil War that, to me, are really what make America a democracy, that it puts real teeth into the founding spirit of the nation, and it opens it and ensures it to everybody, which it had not been prior to that. And really what the Supreme Court did in the century after that was slowly whittle those rights away. The Supreme Court in the 1870s and the 1880s, a series of cases, whether it's Cruikshank or the civil rights cases, basically sent the power back to the states to enforce these. They took the power away from the federal government to enforce equal protection and one person, one vote. And of course, those southern states were not particularly interested in enforcing those rights. And so they did not. And what you saw instead was states like Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia that actually wrote white supremacy into their state constitutions. You go back and you look at the transcripts of these hearings, and that is what they say they were doing, and it was in fact what they did. And so you get Jim Crow effectively rolled into place by the decisions that the U.S. Supreme Court enabled. And it's not until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, even the Civil Rights Act prior to that, did not have the effect that people hoped it would have because it lacked proper enforcement. Right. Once again, it left it up to judges in the localities where these evils were being perpetrated. And those judges oftentimes were segregationists. They were friends with the sheriffs. And the law could not go fast enough to keep up with the whack-a-mole pace that politicians in the South would create new barricades. And so the Civil Rights Act required pre-clearance. It essentially put these localities on probation. It said that for 100 years, you have come up with devious and ingenious ways to circumvent the U.S. Constitution, and your time is up. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. And these states had to come into line. They had to pre-clear. They had to go for approval of any change they wanted to make to their voting laws or election procedures before they were allowed to do it. And the combination of that and the burgeoning civil rights movement, the anti-war movement of the 1960s, the environmental movement, the consumer movement, all of this had the right big business really on their heels. And so what you get is the beginning of a campaign to take those institutions back.
How did Republicans, conservatives model that campaign on some of the successes that liberal Democrats had during that time? LBJ, you mentioned, as well as I think the public interest movement, the Ralph Nader-led movement, right?
Yes, I think really what they thought they might do is build an institution themselves that sort of modeled that. And certainly, and I think what they So Lewis Powell writes a famous memo for the Chamber of Commerce. He was a Southern lawyer, very connected, big business, tobacco. And he writes a memo for the Chamber of Commerce. And he says, we have got radicals on campus and radicals in the news media. And if big business wants to fight for what makes America great, profit and white people, what it has to do is fight for the courts. It says there's an opportunity in the courts. And so what Republicans did was they went about trying to build their own series of public interest law firms. At the same time, the Powell memo inspires the Koch brothers and the Olin and the Scaife foundations, the Coors family, into building big conservative institutions. The Heritage Foundation comes out of this moment. But they also built a lot of public interest law firms. And a few years later, a man named Michael Horowitz begins taking a look at where the successes and failures have been over the course
I thought your work, I was not familiar with him. And I think
it's a fascinating figure.
Really important to learn about this guy. And you tell us all about him in the book. Go ahead.
What Horowitz and his crucial insight is that Republicans were not going to be able to copy what the left had done. They had to build different institutions of their own. And he said these institutions have to start in the law schools. And what he does really is he introduces the young members of a brand new foundation called the Federalist Society to all of these big donors and all of these foundations. And they get the Federalist Society off the ground in the early 80s. Horowitz moves into the Reagan administration as chief of staff at OMB, Office of Management and Budget, which is a huge job. And you begin to see these young conservatives, these Federalist Society folks, taking up jobs in the Reagan administration, both in the White House as well as in the Department of Justice. And they begin to get to work on taking originalism, which had been a theory in the law reviews. And what they recognized was that originalism could also be a Trojan horse that could be used to identify conservative judges and get them on the bench. They begin to realize that the judiciary is a much easier thing to take over than the political branches, because if you get 5 members of the U.S. Supreme Court, you are set. So there's a long game in place to try to influence that. And you begin to see an individual like John Roberts, who is hired out of a clerkship at the U.S. Supreme Court for a deeply conservative and deeply racist William Rehnquist, who would become the Chief Justice later on. Rehnquist had a lot of history in voter suppression. He did some of it himself in person in Arizona as a young lawyer, and then is elevated to the U.S. Supreme Court, where he took part in it as well.
Yeah, just the key, John Roberts picks up the ball where Rehnquist leaves off and is on a mission to remove voting rights. It's just really important.
His life's work.
Yeah, his life's work. I feel like it's important just to mention something that we don't always understand or think about, that after the voting rights bill was passed by LBJ and Martin Luther King, and it was very hard to make that happen. Obviously, it took a very long time. And the right had a reaction, as they always do. There's always a reaction to it. They never were okay with it. And that brings us to Reagan and Rehnquist and obviously John Roberts, who were able to then gut the Voting Rights Act, first Section 2 and then Section 5, and we'll get to that. But I think it's also, because you mentioned the Lewis memo, that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Go Google it, Lewis Powell, the Lewis memo. But there's a new Lewis memo you write, wildly racist one. What do you mean?
Yeah, no, so Powell, it doesn't just write this memo for the Chamber of Commerce. About 3 months later, after telling conservatives and big business if they want to fix the nation, they have to take over the courts, he is appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by Richard Nixon, right? It doesn't get much easier to influence the court than that. And Powell is a key player in the campaign finance decisions in the 1970s that eventually lead all the way to Citizens United. But Powell is also involved in a really crucial voting rights case from which is the city of Mobile v. Bolden. And just to give a little bit of quick history, this case is so important because Mobile was the second largest city in Alabama at the time. It had a large black population, about 35%. But because of racially polarized voting and because Alabama had set up a system called at-large voting, in which you elect everybody to a council in one election. Whites held all of the seats in Alabama, in Mobile on the city council, every single position. And it was impossible for blacks to get elected. And so civil rights activists brought suit, and they said this is a violation of these amendments. And they had lots of evidence, right? Because you could go, the at-large elections were created in 1911 in Alabama, not long after 1901, in which Alabama said its state constitution was going to be an instrument of white supremacy. You've got letters to the editor from politicians at the time back then that say everybody knows that this is to keep the Negro out of office, is what they would say. And they were pretty clear about what their intent was. The effect at the same time was that whites controlled the government in Mobile, and they took all of the resources and they kept them all for themselves. It wasn't just political power. It was education dollars. It was investing in sidewalks and schools and Mobile's on the water, so drainage systems, absolutely everything. Lower courts said this is not okay. This is wrong. And you have to change this. And they mandated that Mobile move to a district system. Mobile appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court. They say, we can't be racist because we designed this system when we didn't think blacks would ever be able to vote. This is actually their defense. And it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. And who is the key player once again but Lewis Powell? And I went to Yale, where I found Potter Stewart's papers, who was the justice who actually wrote this decision. And there's all these letters going back and forth between Stewart and Powell. The one that I write about in Slate today that is so wildly racist, Powell says that our side has got to win this case. If we do not prevail, he says, our cities could become jungles. And this is on Supreme Court letterhead 1980. It's not happening in 1920 or 1940 or 1962.
Jesus.
Somewhere in Alabama. This is the U.S. Supreme Court in 1980. Our cities could become jungles. Mobile v. Bolden, just again super quickly, has further significance because in the 1982 fight over the Voting Rights Act, this is the key thing being debated. Congress wants to fix that decision in the Voting Rights Act. And it's John Roberts at the Department of Justice that says no, and who leads the fight against this. And you can find all of his talking points and all of his draft op-eds and all of the internal memorandas that John Roberts wrote as a man in his 20s, saying, we don't want to make it too easy for people to bring Voting Rights Act cases. On the Supreme Court, John Roberts sure took care of that.
Yeah, you write about this in Slate. The court's decision brought voting rights enforcement of the Department of Justice to a screeching halt, David Daley says. And it's highlighted the importance of the upcoming congressional debate over the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, which would be required by 1982. Congress and civil rights activists would be ready to add new language that overrode the court's decision and reiterated that the Voting Rights Act was meant to safeguard against racial discrimination in voting, whether by intent or effect. From the Department of Justice, one young conservative lawyer at home in Ronald Reagan's new, quote, morning in America would lead a determined fight to maintain Lewis Powell's blindfolded race neutrality. He, too, would someday join the court with an underserved reputation as a centrist and an institutionalist, masking his actual life's work. His name is John Roberts. You do such important research for this new book, looking into those memos and bringing these to light. But you also talk a lot about John Roberts and do all you can to debunk this undeserved reputation, which, by the way, you mentioned, I think, in the New York Times or some obituary when Lewis Powell died. They didn't mention the Powell memo. It doesn't come up. And I think this is why journalism and history from different points of view matters, because this is what you're doing in this book about John Roberts. Be harsh. Tell us about John Roberts, this young man, and why he has made his life's work to make it harder for black folks to vote, or, if I'm being less cynical, to clearly roll back the Voting Rights Act.
This is John Roberts' life work. It's impossible to look at the arc of his career, the arc of these decisions, and to think anything but. Listen, John Roberts is not the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. John Roberts is the most successful Republican politician in America in the last 25 years. This is the man who has delivered policy decisions that the Republican Party has wanted and been unable to achieve through the legislative process, whether we're talking about guns or voting rights or the regulatory state or abortion. John Roberts has delivered all of those things. And yet he still has this reputation as a centrist, as a moderate, as an institutionalist. John Roberts has that myth going for him. It's the best thing he has going for him because it's allowed him to mask the actual agenda that he has, the actual job that he has done in creating an America that looks extraordinarily different in 2024 than it does when he took his seat on the bench back in 2005.
And it looks different because specifically the maps have been redrawn, the electoral maps, and no one has covered that in the country as well as you have, David Daley. You've written all articles and books and appearances like this to talk about gerrymandering. But let's just go back just a second. John Roberts was able to accomplish the conservative Republican, and one might argue evangelical as well, agenda, even though there are all these conservatives on the court are Catholic, by the way. Nonetheless, he's able to accomplish what Republican legislatures, at least the U.S. Congress, the House and Senate, can't accomplish. Certainly a lot of states were passing all kinds of draconian laws. But when it came to all of those issues that you mentioned, including abortion and voting rights, they weren't popular, as you mentioned earlier. So Republicans couldn't get them through their state houses or through the U.S. Congress, certainly not with a filibuster-proof Senate. And so John Roberts did all he could to rewrite those maps. Tell us more about the gerrymandering and how they were able to surprise the Obama campaign, for example. When Obama won, they were looking back at the maps and going, how did we lose in these different places? I thought we had these locked up. The answer is in your book.
Republicans have had two different tracks going, and what we see right now is that those two tracks have really woven together. One of those tracks was to take control of the judiciary. The other track was to win control of state legislatures through redistricting. And John Roberts' decision in Citizens United that freed unlimited dark money into our system back in 2010 helped fund the Republican operation called Red Map, the Redistricting Majority Project in 2010, that was designed to inject millions of dollars into down-ballot races for state legislature to take control of chambers in Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Indiana, Georgia, Pennsylvania, all ahead of the redistricting that was going to happen the following year after the census. Republicans took control in all of those states by winning about 107 key state legislative races in 16 states. They had the power to redesign not only the legislative maps in those states, but also to gerrymander themselves into control of the U.S. House, which they turn around and hold in 2012 in the Obama re-elect year, even though Democrats won the popular vote for the House by 1.4 million votes nationwide. It didn't matter. So Obama's second term effectively ended on the night that he was reelected because Republicans took over the House and went ahead to obstruct an agenda that Americans had voted for overwhelmingly in all states across the country. Right. And so what Roberts then does in 2013 is What Roberts then does in 2013 is the Shelby County decision. And people think about Shelby County as ending preclearance and being bad for voting rights. And certainly it was all of those things. But one of the things that one of those things that Shelby County also did was preclearance required many of these states across the South to also run their maps past the Department of Justice in order to be sure that they were not retrogressive racial gerrymanders. So Texas, Arizona, Georgia, these states had to pre-approve those maps, and the Department of Justice could say, no, those maps do not adequately and equitably represent communities in your state. Once they didn't have to do that anymore, it freed these states to not only pass all kinds of voting rights laws, it also freed extreme legislatures to take over in these places and go after abortion rights, to ban the teaching of Black history in some of these states, to do all of the extreme things that we have seen come out of state legislatures, much of which would not be possible on fair maps, which the court has effectively taken away. Right. And then a couple of years later, in the Common Cause versus Rucho case, the court once again closes the doors of the federal courthouses to citizens to be able to do anything about this. And it's a similar decision to the Dobbs case, because Roberts disingenuously says, you can still fix gerrymandering. You have to just do it through the political process. You can't fix gerrymandering through the political process. That's the entire point of gerrymandering.
It is all so important. And I want to ask you two more questions, and I want to give you the opportunity to say something you haven't told us, because I'm not done with the book. And I said before I hit record, I want to do a series of interviews on this book because that's how important I think it is. But I'll give you the opportunity to just mention one more thing that you think is really important from the book that I'm not asking yet.
I think what's important is that there's a hermetically sealed circle that has been created. You've got Leonard Leo in control of a $1.6 billion Marble Freedom Trust, dark money entity that funds all sorts of various groups. And they have names like the Honest Elections Project, that in reality they're the opposite of that. And the same people and the same foundations, what they're doing is they are finding and funding the litigation. They are paying the conservative white shoe law firms in D.C. to take these cases. The Federalist Society is providing the research and the legal theories for all of this. They are creating the amicus briefs through all of these same foundations and law firms and legal theories. And then they're bringing the cases before Federalist Society judges that they have handpicked. And so all of this is happening and being funded in the same way. And so when you see these decisions, none of it is happening by accident or coincidence. This is all very carefully designed. And if we are going to do something about it, we have to understand just how deep and structural this is and what it is that we are up against if we want to try to take this court and our democracy back. Because the option of doing nothing is lying back and accepting a right-wing court that could be in power right now into the 2050s. If Amy Coney Barrett stays on the court as long as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she'll be on the court until my 11-year-old is in his early 60s.
Yes, you're scary.
That's a long time.
Well, it would seem one of the most important things we can do is win the election in November. And so now you and I are talking on the day that news broke that Kamala Harris had picked Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate. And I wanted to add you to my very special extravaganza reacting to this news. What do you know of Tim Walz? And I know you're focused on your book, which also just came out, but I'm not sure how read in you are. But what are your thoughts on this selection?
I think Tim Walz has got great dad energy, right? I look at Tim Walz and I say, this is somebody who in the 1980s was probably at a Replacements and a Husker Du show, may have been to see the Hold Steady fairly recently. And I just think that is good, positive energy to have in the White House, right? The Hold Steady talk about staying positive. Let's go. I look at Walz and I see a teacher. I see a veteran. I see a football coach who's a dad of daughters. And he just looks relatable. He looks unafraid to bring a message anywhere. He seems to have the ability to really talk about progressive democratic ideals to absolutely any audience, to go into rural America and make this case, which I think the party has really failed to do and has really seeded a lot of those states and a lot of those voters and people. And when no one talks to you and all you do is see Republican candidates in Fox News, that helps create so much of the tunnel vision we have in this country where folks only talk or hear media that they already agree with. Right. So it seems like a pretty positive ticket. I look at two pretty joyful, happy warriors out there, and I do look at Tim Walz, and I don't see anyone who's ever fucked a sofa.
I wasn't ready. Just wasn't ready is all.
I didn't think you were ready for that. I didn't think you were ready for that, which I was just looking for a reaction.
What do you make of that type of meme and new media and the way it's being used to help, it would seem, Kamala Harris and progressives in general, and to hurt conservatives? And the reason I think that is because it's mostly young people that are making those memes, and they're more likely to be progressive. So that's why it goes that way. Also, I think they're generally a little funnier, but that's my bias. What do you make of this new energy and this new media, the way it's being used? So things like weird go viral, and traditional media and politicians are using them. And the couch fucking rumor also becomes such a big deal. And it doesn't seem like these right-wing conservative candidates, Trump, Vance, and others, really can get a foothold in any of it as a result of the way it's headed. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so far, so good. I think it's been pretty good. It's amazing to me, right? I've just written a 430-page book detailing all of this. And really what I should have done was just get a couch meme going. Yeah. Leonard Leo... I don't know if Leonard Leo fucks a couch.
Now, we can come up with something to tarnish that man.
I should make the case that John Roberts rubs up against his cat.
I'm told, I don't know if this is...
I'm getting myself in trouble here.
No, I don't think you are. I don't know if this is true. I heard Leonard Leo rides a bike with no seat, and that's why he prefers it. But that's... I don't know if that's true.
See, you're funny. See, that's why I shouldn't try to be funny. Yeah, you're actually funny.
May it go viral to help sell your book, which, a reminder, you've joined me so many times over the years talking about these very important issues and writing about your book, talking about your book as well. So I hope everybody will go get it. It's so important. And I want to talk to you a whole bunch more, because everybody needs to know this. Antidemocratic: Inside the Far Right's 50-Year Plot to Control American Elections. David Daley, you are a star, an American treasure for your journalism and your authoring, and I hope a lot of people will buy it. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Very kind of you. Always appreciate coming on. Thanks again, Pete.
Yeah, there he goes, David Daley. Everybody go get that book. I am telling you, you will not be sorry. It is a great read. He is a great guest. I like to put some money in his pocket because I want to keep him doing this really important research, journalism, and writing. Antidemocratic: Inside the Far Right's 50-Year Plot to Control American Elections. Very, very important. And I highly recommend getting his other books as well, including Rat Fucked: The True Story Behind the Secret Plan to Steal America's Democracy, and Unrigged: How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. Real good stuff from David Daley. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout, which starts at 8 p.m. You'll get the link in your email. If you don't, let me know and I'll send it to you. And invite a friend if you want. You could send it out to a friend. I've been doing that lately. I'll try to get some special guests to stop by, as I have been. If you've got any candidate ideas, email me today, and I'll try to get some candidates to call in for a few minutes as well. I hope to see you there. You bumblebees listening all the way to the end. I can't do it without you. I hope you're okay and finding the joy. Love you guys. Talk to you tomorrow. John Carroll, take us away.
You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand